The Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Take a look at this for a moment. 5 minutes ago, a heavy sealed door deep beneath Windsor Castle opened under Prince William's direct authority. A piece of Princess Diana's lost legacy emerged from the dark. The future king did not request permission. He did not wait for palace approval, nor did he consult the advisors who usually manage the crown's affairs. He walked in, bypassed the usual protocols, and reclaimed his mother's delicate pearl bracelet directly from the royal vault. In that exact same written order, Queen Camilla was permanently denied access to the chamber, where it had remained hidden for decades. Now, watch this. This was not a routine audit, or a simple transfer of historical items between staterooms. William stood before the open display case without moving, staring down at the pearls resting against dark velvet. The sight struck him with the force of a memory long buried. The royal vault protects objects held by the crown, but it could not protect the boy who watched his mother wear those exact pearls. This bracelet was private property, belonging to Diana's personal estate rather than the state monarchy. William signed the authorization order on the spot, then placed his pen directly beside Camilla's name. The instruction was absolute. She could not enter the chamber, request the item, or authorize anyone else to remove it on her behalf. Before we go deeper into what this decision really means for the future of the monarchy, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Prime Royal Central so you never miss an update on the stories shaping the royal family. So stay with me here, because the prince acted precisely because those pearls carried memories no palace official could ever catalog or archive. He remembered his mother leaning toward him at a quiet family gathering, her wrist turning as he counted each individual pearl, her soft laughter filling a room he had never forgotten. When Camilla received the restriction notice shortly after, she read the final sentence twice. She did not tear the paper or call for an aide. The Queen Consort pressed the document flat against her desk and realized immediately that this was no standard administrative directive. William had named her directly in the text, creating a permanent boundary inside the official record that no private appeal could ever erase. Then, the future king reached beneath the display lining inside the vault and found the real reason this moment had become entirely unavoidable. A folded note lay tucked beneath the felt cushion, addressed specifically to Diana's eldest son. Her message had survived in complete secrecy for years. King Charles knew the bracelet remained at Windsor, but he had never seen the note. Nor had he imagined his late wife had left an instruction capable of drawing such a stark line through the household today. William lifted the bracelet with both hands. Behind him, the heavy vault door remained wide open, and the signed order bearing Camilla's name lay beside the empty velvet display case. An aide stepped forward with 2 distinct warnings. Queen Camilla was demanding an immediate explanation, and the king was already walking down the corridor toward the chamber. William simply closed his fist around the note. But before he could carry his mother's bracelet out of the vault, the woman who had just been denied entry demanded to know why the past was suddenly being turned against her. To the public eye, it was merely a vintage bracelet crafted from pearls and diamonds. To William, it was the tangible memory of a mother lost too soon. To Charles, it was physical evidence of a past marriage whose pain had never truly dissolved. And to Camilla, that locked vault instantly became something far more dangerous. A judgment written by the dead, enforced by the son who inherited Diana's grief. William carried the bracelet straight into a private study and set it beside an old photograph of his mother. The memory returned with sharp clarity. During a quiet afternoon decades ago, Diana had allowed him to touch the jewelry while speaking softly about courage, duty, and kindness. He had been too young back then to understand why her voice sounded so tired, but now every single pearl seemed to hold a piece of that quiet weight. The prince stared at the photograph as his frustration deepened. Too much of his mother's life had been boxed up, labeled, and managed by officials who prioritized institutional protocol over personal pain. An archival collection can preserve an object for generations, but it cannot preserve the personal warmth attached to it. That was why this specific item mattered so much to the prince. It belonged to family memory, long before it belonged to institutional history. Charles understood the danger of this moment from the opposite side of the table. He knew his son had the strongest personal claim to Diana's estate. Yet he also recognized that permanently excluding his wife would create a visible divide right at the center of the household. The king had spent years attempting to maintain stability, but now every available choice risked alienating someone he loved. Camilla sat rigidly in her office with the restriction notice resting before her. She noted to her private secretary that the decision felt like being judged all over again for a past the palace had repeatedly declared settled. She had expected a degree of caution from the prince, but she had not anticipated him writing her name into an irreversible administrative ban. Then another document surfaced on the desk. Months earlier, Camilla had submitted an internal request to view the bracelet for a proposed exhibition focused on royal women. William had never been informed of this request at the time. The paperwork appeared standard on the surface, until William examined the bottom of the sheet and spotted a handwritten initial beside the approval line. Okay, stay with me, because the future king recognized that mark instantly. Outside the study door, Charles paused with his hand resting above the handle. Inside, his son looked from the bracelet to the familiar signature and asked quietly why his father had never mentioned it. The discovery of the pearls had already brought William's grief back to the surface, but that single initial beneath Camilla's inquiry turned his frustration directly toward the king. The order executed 5 minutes ago in the vault did not originate today. It actually began months earlier during a private evening reception at Windsor, when William witnessed an interaction that changed his perspective on the item forever. Camilla had not simply asked about the pearls in passing. She had stood beside their protective case in the gallery, discussing plans to wear them at a high-profile public event, forcing the future king to confront a scenario he could not accept. Palace archivists had gathered several pieces of historic jewelry for a private inspection ahead of an upcoming anniversary display, honoring influential women connected to the monarchy. A secured archive room had been cleared for the evaluation, with access restricted to a very small group. Camilla attended with Charles's informal backing, believing her position entitled her to review any items being considered for the public showcase. During that reception, William entered the room just as Camilla asked an archivist whether Diana's pearl bracelet could be customized and fitted for her to wear at the opening ceremony. The future king stopped in his tracks. Camilla raised her wrist above the glass display, testing how the pearls might look against her outfit, and that simple gesture struck William harder than any formal request ever could. He saw no sense of tribute in that action. He saw his mother's personal property being pulled into a public performance she could no longer approve or decline. The prince stepped between Camilla and the display, reached over, and lowered the protective glass cover himself. In a controlled voice, he stated that the bracelet would not be leaving the room under any circumstances. Camilla insisted her intention was centered on unity and honor rather than personal claim. She argued that wearing the piece would demonstrate that the family had finally moved past its old conflicts. William replied that unity did not require taking the personal belongings of his late mother and placing them on someone else. The room fell silent, but the issue was far from settled. An archivist later approached William with a documented schedule showing that the bracelet had already been assigned for a fitting session the following morning. That single detail revealed that the plan had progressed far beyond a casual suggestion. Fitting arrangements, security clearance, and transport logs were already moving forward behind the scenes. The future king acted before midnight that same evening. He canceled the transfer, ordered the piece moved back to the lowest vault level, and instructed staff to restrict the log. However, he did not launch a public argument at that moment. He waited until he possessed the note left inside the case, giving him the unquestionable authority to end the debate permanently. Camilla viewed that reception from a completely different angle. In a private account recorded for the household files, she described William's intervention as an intentional, calculated dismissal, suggesting he was using his mother's legacy to undermine her official standing beside the king. What William viewed as protecting his mother's memory, Camilla viewed as a direct public slight. And now, those conflicting perspectives were about to meet inside a closed room. The palace had managed public controversies and private disputes for decades, but the meeting taking place inside William's chamber presented an immediate challenge to household order. There were no press officers present, no advisors mediating the conversation, and no scripted statements to rely on. Camilla entered looking for respect for her position. Charles entered seeking compromise. William stood beside the table where the bracelet lay, determined to set a boundary that could not be crossed. The prince placed the pearls in the exact center of the table and refused to move them. This private chamber, used for sensitive family matters outside the formal structure of court life, left no room for deflection. William chose this space deliberately because this was not a debate over administrative procedures. It was a firm statement regarding who had the right to control Diana's personal history. Camilla asked directly why her name was explicitly recorded on a permanent access restriction. She reiterated that her original inquiry was intended for an official display honoring the institution, framing his actions as turning a public duty into a personal dispute. William answered calmly, pointing out that the fitting schedule and transport arrangements proved the request had moved well beyond a simple viewing. He placed his hand beside the pearls and stated clearly that she would never wear what belonged to his mother. Charles stepped forward to de-escalate the room before the disagreement widened further. The king acknowledged that he had initialed the preliminary request months ago, operating under the assumption that featuring the item in an official exhibition might offer a sense of closure and continuity for the public. He had hoped a single ceremonial gesture might help smooth over years of lingering tension. Instead, that decision had brought the issue straight back into the household. William then unfolded the note found beneath the velvet lining. Written in Diana's own hand and preserved for years, the text explicitly requested that her personal jewelry remain with her sons and never be repurposed for institutional branding. The prince read the sentence aloud once. That single line changed the tone of the room completely. Camilla's composure broke, and she pushed her chair back sharply from the table, the noise echoing through the silent chamber. So, stay with me, because the reaction in that room made one thing undeniably clear. This was no longer just about a piece of jewelry sitting in a velvet box. It was about who held the authority to write the final chapter of Princess Diana's story within the royal house. Camilla stood up, adjusted her jacket, and looked directly at Charles. She stated that allowing a prince to issue binding unilateral restrictions against the queen consort set a precedent that undermined the authority of the crown itself. If a senior royal could unilaterally rewrite access protocols based on personal feeling, then the structural hierarchy of the household meant very little. Charles sat between them, caught in the middle of a divide he had spent years trying to prevent. On one side stood his wife, demanding the respect and access consistent with her title. On the other side stood his eldest son and heir, holding physical proof of his late mother's explicit wishes. The king tried to suggest a compromise, proposing that the bracelet be moved to a neutral state collection where neither party held direct management over it. William rejected the compromise without hesitation. He reminded his father that the item was never state property to begin with. It was an asset of Diana's private estate, passed down to her children, and no administrative compromise could alter that legal reality. The prince pointed out that by initialing Camilla's request months earlier, Charles had inadvertently validated an effort to bypass Diana's explicit instructions. The room grew quiet as the king looked down at the handwriting on the note. He recognized his late wife's penmanship immediately. The words were clear, direct, and left zero room for reinterpretation. Charles raised his hand, signaling for silence, and acknowledged that the note changed the legal and personal context entirely. He admitted he had not been aware of the letter's existence when he placed his initials on the preliminary paperwork months ago. Camilla turned to the king, her tone sharpening. She asked if he was truly prepared to let a handwritten note, hidden for decades, overturn a decision approved for an official state exhibition. She argued that allowing personal sentiments to override formal household planning created an environment where protocol could be rewritten at any moment. William did not engage in a back-and-forth argument. He simply picked up the authorization form he had signed 5 minutes earlier, folded it carefully, and placed it right next to Diana's letter. He informed both of them that the order was already logged into the secure archive system at Windsor. It was an official record now. To reverse it, Charles would have to issue an explicit countercommand overriding his heir on a matter regarding his own mother's private estate, a move that would inevitably leak and trigger a massive public fallout. Now, watch this. The strategic precision of William's move became undeniable. By using the formal palace administrative system to log the restriction, he turned household protocol, the very tool often used to manage his mother's legacy, into the exact mechanism protecting it. He had used their own system to secure the boundary. Camilla realized the trap immediately. Demanding the king officially overturn his son's directive over Diana's personal property would look disastrous to the public. It would frame the institution as prioritizing appearances over the clear, written wishes of a deceased mother to her children. The political cost was simply too high, and everyone in the room knew it. Without saying another word, Camilla turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the private chamber. She paused for a moment with her hand on the brass handle, looked back at Charles, and stated that this decision would ripple far beyond a single display case at Windsor Castle. Then she opened the door and exited into the gallery, leaving the king and the future king alone in the quiet room. Charles looked across the table at his son. The silence between them was heavy, filled with decades of unsaid words, shared grief, and the undeniable strain of balancing family ties with the demands of the crown. The king asked William why he hadn't brought the note to him privately before executing the exclusion order in the vault. William looked his father in the eye and answered directly. He explained that every time he had tried to handle these matters through informal conversations, the machinery of the court continued moving forward anyway, just like the fitting schedule that had been quietly set up behind his back. The only way to stop the process permanently was to establish a firm, unyielding boundary within the official system itself. The king looked down at the pearls resting on the dark wood. He reached out a hand, touching the velvet display casing lightly, before letting out a quiet sigh. He acknowledged the truth in his son's words. The pressure to maintain public appearances and ensure smooth ceremonial events had sometimes blinded the household management to the personal reality of the grief his sons still carried. William carefully picked up the pearl bracelet, placed it back into its protective case, and drew the note inside with it. He secured the clasp with a firm click that echoed through the high-ceilinged room. He informed the king that the bracelet would be transferred to his own private residence at Adelaide Cottage, completely removed from the Windsor archive system, where it would remain until it was time to pass it down to his own daughter, Princess Charlotte. Charles nodded slowly, offering no further resistance. The debate over the bracelet was officially over, but the structural damage to the relationships within the royal household was already done. The line had been drawn, the order was logged, and the balance of power regarding Diana's personal legacy had shifted permanently into the hands of the future king. As William walked out of the private chamber carrying the small leather case, the staff in the hallway stood in absolute silence. Word of the confrontation had already begun to circulate through the quiet channels of the palace staff. They knew that what had just transpired in that room was not merely a disagreement over historic jewelry, but a decisive moment where Prince William asserted his authority as heir, proving that when it comes to protecting his mother's memory, he will not yield to palace pressure, administrative convenience, or even the king himself. The sealed vault door beneath Windsor Castle remained locked, its log updated to reflect a directive that could not be undone. The pearls were finally out of reach of those who sought to use them for public performance, safely back where they belonged, in the hands of the son who remembered the quiet sound of his mother's voice and the promise he made to protect her legacy. This dramatic stand at Windsor Castle marks a defining chapter in the ongoing story of the House of Windsor, showing just how deeply the past continues to shape the present decisions of the royal family. Thank you for watching this breakdown on Prime Royal Central. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Prime Royal Central right now so you never miss an episode as we continue to uncover the deep history, hidden drama, and powerful secrets behind the royal gates. She accused Prince William of taking a dead woman's private words and turning them into a sharp weapon against a living queen, warning King Charles that his silence was already taking a side. The monarch stood completely motionless between them. He asked to read the rest of the letter, but his son folded the paper, held it tight, and refused. First, William wanted the absolute truth about that fitting room transfer. Who had authorized it behind his back? Who had allowed the plan to move forward without his knowledge? William had already denied Queen Camilla the pearls, but a far greater question now hung over the king. How much authority had Charles actually used to bring those personal items within her reach in the first place? A monarch's signature can open almost any door inside the estate, but inside that private chamber, Charles discovered that one door no longer belonged to him alone. Princess Diana's personal possessions were tied not simply to royal protocol but to family inheritance, direct memory, and the private rights of her two sons. William had drawn a hard boundary around those pearls, and for the very first time, the king faced the sobering reality that his own approval had crossed the line. Charles sat alone after the confrontation, staring down at the handwritten initial at the bottom of the archival request. Crown-owned jewels belonged to the monarchy as a public institution, but Diana's personal jewelry remained part of her private estate and direct family inheritance. That legal distinction gave William something infinitely stronger than ceremonial influence. It gave him a direct claim rooted in blood, memory, and the explicit wishes of the woman who had owned the bracelet. The king still controlled overall vault procedures, official public exhibitions, and palace access logs. Those powers allowed him to approve preliminary reviews, but they could not erase what those pearls meant to Diana's children. He removed his spectacles, placed them beside the paper, and realized that what had looked like a routine administrative approval had reopened one of his son's deepest wounds. The future king entered the room without any ceremony. Charles told him quietly that he had never intended to take anything away from his mother's legacy. William looked directly at the signed request and answered that pure intentions had not protected the bracelet. Royal authority, he stated, could not be used to soften history by placing his mother's personal jewelry onto Camilla. That would force her sons to participate in rewriting the very life they had watched her endure. Charles pushed back, arguing that he had simply tried to bring two painful chapters of the family's history together. The prince firmly rejected that defense, stating that unity forced without consent was not healing. It was just control wrapped in ceremonial language. So stay with me here, because that was when the official vault register arrived. The record listed two additional pieces connected directly to Diana, a delicate diamond brooch and an inscribed presentation case. Camilla's staff had sought permission to examine both items, proving that the pearl bracelet was not an isolated ask, but part of a much broader exhibition strategy. The king turned the pages of the log and uncovered something even worse. A senior household official had advanced those requests without showing Charles the complete list. The king had approved a general review, while someone inside his own administrative office had treated that initial check as broad permission for everything. The king ordered the officials responsible to be brought to his office immediately. But before that meeting could even begin, an urgent message arrived from Camilla's private secretary. She had abruptly canceled her next public appearance and completely withdrawn her participation from the upcoming exhibition. By that evening, the denial in the vault had exploded into something far larger than a private administrative boundary. Camilla canceled her scheduled appearance, withdrew from a major palace reception, and ordered every single reference to Diana's pearl bracelet wiped from her official office files. Courtiers began choosing their words with extreme caution. Charles stopped defending the original transfer request, and William carried the pearls away from the Windsor vault once and for all. When Camilla received formal confirmation that her name had been scrubbed from the exhibition program, she sat in absolute silence. The Palace Jewelry Committee was quietly dissolved, while every pending access request involving Diana's personal possessions was immediately placed under full administrative review. Camilla removed her glasses and stated plainly that she would not attend an event built around her public exclusion. She closed the exhibition folder and pushed it across her desk, ordering her secretary to remove her name from the entire program. What had started as an effort to place her at the center of a historic royal tribute had become visible proof that the institution itself no longer knew how to protect her from Diana's lingering shadow. Charles entered the room quietly and found her sitting alone. The king tried to explain that the situation had escalated far beyond his original approval, but she informed him that his silence during the confrontation sounded like direct agreement with William's judgment. He then confessed that the fitting room arrangements should never have been allowed to proceed. That admission cut deeper than any heated argument, because his initial approval was the sole reason she had believed the plan was safe to pursue. William was moving just as fast on his end. The prince officially transferred the pearl bracelet out of Windsor's institutional vault and moved it into a secure private collection under his direct personal supervision, effectively shutting down every remaining administrative route Camilla's staff might have tried to use. Take a look at this for a moment. Shortly after, the summoned household official confessed during a recorded internal interview that the exhibition had been specifically designed around Camilla, wearing one historical object linked to each preceding royal generation, with Diana's pearl bracelet planned as the emotional focal point. Even worse, a formal press photograph had already been scheduled featuring the Queen consort wearing the pearls beneath an official portrait of Diana. William understood the reality instantly. This was a calculated effort to create an iconic image powerful enough to reshape public memory. Catherine found him shortly after he received the briefing. She did not approach him as the Princess of Wales, but simply as his wife. She asked to read the note Diana had left behind, and offered to help him figure out the right way forward. There were no court officials present in the room when William finally unfolded the full letter. Only Catherine sat across from him, as Diana's pearl bracelet rested on the table between them. The future king finally admitted out loud what he had spent months keeping inside. Seeing Camilla near those pearls had made him feel like a helpless child all over again, forced to stand by while adults decided how Diana would be remembered. The pearls carried his deep-seated fear that his mother's true story would be softened and repurposed by the very institution that had caused her so much distress. Catherine listened quietly, then offered a gentle warning. Protection can quickly turn into self-imposed punishment if grief is allowed to dictate every decision. Guardianship required far more than just keeping the bracelet away from Camilla. It required giving those pearls a purpose that extended beyond old family wounds. Okay, stay with me, because this was the moment William unfolded the final section of the note. Written clearly in Diana's own handwriting, the message requested that the bracelet one day pass to a woman in the family who would protect her sons without ever using her name for power. Those words changed the entire nature of the moment. This was an explicit request to carry love forward into the next generation. The prince looked up at Catherine and asked her to officially safeguard the bracelet until the next generation was ready. Only after William gave a quiet nod did she lift the pearls gently, promising that the bracelet would never be worn to replace Diana or soften the reality of her life. Catherine then made a final choice. The pearls should eventually belong to Princess Charlotte when she grew old enough to understand their weight. William agreed without hesitation. By sunrise the next morning, the private battle inside Windsor Castle had become the central news story across the country. The palace formally confirmed that the Prince of Wales had assumed full personal responsibility for Princess Diana's pearl bracelet, ensuring it would remain strictly within her direct family line. Outside the gates of Kensington Palace, crowds gathered with white roses, turning the entrance into a memorial once again. A major national front page displayed the bracelet beneath a simple headline: "Her son brings them home." King Charles requested one final family meeting to bring the conflict to an official end. The king placed a binding legal directive onto the table, establishing that all of Diana's personal jewelry was officially recognized as the exclusive private property of her sons. No palace exhibition or official estate office could ever display those items without direct written consent from William or Harry. The monarch admitted openly that approving Camilla's original request had been a mistake, born from a misguided desire to use symbolism to heal old family divides. William accepted his father's apology, while making it absolute that he would never permit the institution to reshape Diana's life story for convenience. Camilla then spoke, formally withdrawing every remaining request regarding Diana's personal items, accepting the boundary as absolute. Catherine reached over, lifted the leather case containing the pearls, and placed it inside a new box marked specifically for Princess Charlotte. William closed the case with a heavy click and handed the key directly to his wife. The pearls now belonged entirely to Diana's direct bloodline. The denial of access was absolute, and the legacy was returned forever to the children she loved. Thank you for watching this full breakdown on Prime Royal Central. If you found this story compelling, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Prime Royal Central right now, so you never miss an episode as we uncover the secrets behind the royal gates.